District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Energy and conservation topics are heating up this fall, although it still feels like summer, very humid in my part of the United States. But I hope everyone is having a wonderful start to the fall. There is so much happening, especially on the energy front. I can't keep up with everything, and it's really hard to decide what I want to cover to ensure quality control and to spotlight topics that are worthy of discussion or that might not be spotlighted so much in media. I have several quick updates before I talk about this permitting reform panel I did with 2 Wisconsin congressmen in concert with Americans for Prosperity and also visiting Vortex Optics. A couple housekeeping items. For those of you in the Washington, D.C. area, and I know a lot of my listeners also reside in this metropolitan region, our nation's capital, I have a last-minute edition panel with the Hudson Institute, which is a preeminent foreign policy think tank. They also cover energy. I was invited last minute to partake, and I gladly accepted once I got the request. Their upcoming North American Energy Dominance and G7 Energy Ministers Summit. So it's the morning of this Wednesday, October 1st, if you're Washington, D.C. based. Perfect opportunity, not if you just want to hear from me or reconnect with me or whatever. Lots of other great panelists. We are joined by a couple of Canadians too to talk about energy abundance, energy dominance. It is in person in downtown Washington, D.C. I will include links in the show notes if you're interested. If you can't make it, there is a live stream that will supplement the talk. I'll be talking a lot about what I discuss here on the podcast in my policy work with independent women and much more, but it's a great honor. I feel like I've made it now that these think tanks are inviting me to come speak. So it's a huge honor to speak in a format such as that at Hudson Institute. So I wanted to put that on your radar. Also, if you're in Tennessee, in the Nashville area, my organization, our social media network called Independent Women's Network, is hosting a mixer energy event. Informal, formal, however you make it, in downtown Nashville this Friday, October 3rd at Pinewood Social. Would love to have you. I'm also going to be joined alongside Stephanie Cross, who is one of my board advisors at the center. I have to bring her on the podcast. She has a very fascinating story. She's an oil and gas producer, runs a company out of Tennessee. Phenomenal lady. We had crossed paths at a American Stewards for Liberty conference in Dallas about land issues, opposing 30 by 30 a few years ago. We didn't exactly meet then, but we have become friends ever since. She's been a great supporter of my professional center, and she invited me to come speak at this year's annual joint Tennessee Oil and Gas Association and Tennessee Mining Association conference in Gatlinburg. So we're doing a series of events to tee up my appearance at this conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I've included links in the show notes if you're interested. So Tennessee folks, I don't know, it's mostly energy industry people at the Gatlinburg event, so you have to be a member, from my understanding, to attend that. But I hope to put some deliverables out there from that conference. But if you are in Nashville, you work in energy policy, conservation, you want to meet up, come hear what our organization is working on, learn about Stephanie's story, please come to Nashville Pinewood Social. It's one of my favorite venues. It has a bowling alley. We're not going to be bowling. We're going to be at their outdoor patio. But it's a great centrally located location, and we're ready to talk energy. So hope to have you there. That's free to attend, and links to both of those events, for your curiosity, are included. So permitting reform and my visit to Vortex. So I love having opportunities to speak, but even beyond these opportunities to speak, which I'm grateful for, I'm glad people are seeking me out and view me as a subject matter expert. I have still a lot to learn, of course, and I know a lot more than I think the average bear, but it's very humbling and wonderful that I can speak at these opportunities. But permitting reform is something you're going to be hearing a lot about this fall. It's not just a cliche. It's not just a catchphrase. It actually is a very serious need in the United States with rising electricity demand, more energy consumed than produced, all these different factors, AI, what have you. There is a need, and a remedy would include to help address this growing electricity demand we're seeing all across the country, if not all across the world. And other countries are experiencing this as well. A remedy would be permitting reform. What is permitting reform in a nutshell? It is a process to modernize some existing laws that pertain to approving projects, citing projects, energy infrastructure and mining. It can be even transportation and roads. Yet there is a need for permitting reform for energy and mining projects. Here is why, before I go into detail what that looks like, because it involves a lot of laws, it involves a lot of lawyers, involves litigation. It's sometimes above the pale, a little hard to comprehend. So I try to break this down very simply in my job with Independent Women as Center Director there, and also here on the podcast. I've talked about this across the years, but I think it's time to dedicate a couple minutes to this need for permitting reform, among many things. As it stands in the United States right now, do you all know how long it takes to get not a project from breaking ground to full construction? This is pre-construction review, environmental review. Do you know the average time frame for just pre-construction review in the United States is for a typical energy project? 7 to 10 years. What I learned recently from the Permitting Council, which is helmed by my friend Emily Dominich, she was appointed the chair of that very pivotal committee relating to the permitting reform process, and she's been approving a lot of stuff through Fast 41, which is a process to expedite projects that are of great importance. The president, the Trump administration writ large, has issued executive orders to, in line with a national emergency, and take it for what you will, but it actually really is a pressing need with respect to critical minerals and even energy. Therefore, the executive branch and government agencies have said, we want to expedite the process. And actually, going back to some earlier executive orders issued by Trump 2.0, which a lot of people like myself are celebrating, is that they want to have a re-examination of even the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, even from its origins being enacted into law in the 1970s, to have a rewrite of that. And they can do so much. They can put executive orders and have it go into effect, but those executive orders do not hold teeth unless Congress does something. I want to talk about critical minerals, going back to that point. It takes 29 years to do the siting and pre-construction and approval process, according to what the Permitting Council talked about. That's unacceptable. That's why we see Russia, China, in particular, shoring up more energy infrastructure projects. China is on track to approve 40 new nuclear reactors. Russia has maybe 15, 20 in the works. And what are we doing? We're twiddling our thumbs because of overregulation, of misinformation about nuclear as it relates to that. But when it comes to critical minerals, this is a global problem, as China owns the majority of both production and also processing of critical minerals, including rare earth elements. I believe production is at least 60% holdings and processing is close to 90, or those two stats might be inverted. However, it is a monopoly. Nevertheless, the U.S. is eager to build new mining projects. A couple projects in California and Wyoming are in the works. The Permitting Council that I alluded to, that is helmed by Emily Dominich, they're using Fast 41. It's a measure to streamline project approval. Lots of things are in the works. But this can't be done alone without the help of Congress to amend various laws like NEPA, which governs all of this. The Supreme Court said that NEPA, as it's interpreted, federal bureaucracies can't consider when trying to approve or weigh a decision to approve a project. You can't use indirect factors like climate change and environmental justice. This was according to a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court. Even the liberal justices said there's something wrong with how NEPA is interpreted, and it has to be kicked back to Congress's court to redo, reform, modernize the law, et cetera, et cetera. There is an appetite to do permitting reform. There is a great bill called the SPEED Act, but like anything, some people think it's insufficiently good because it doesn't include emphasizing renewables, which are the sources that are sadly bringing us into this energy scarcity mindset and skyrocketing electricity bills with this insistence we have to shift from reliable energy, including oil, coal, and gas, plus nuclear, to 100% renewables by some arbitrary deadline. That is obviously not working. You see this even globally. The International Energy Agency, which is a big intergovernmental body organization that has said that we need more oil and gas investments coupled with nuclear. They are pivoting. If the IEA is pivoting away from net zero, that's how you know the renewables cause is in deep trouble. Also, private sector going big into nuclear and even big into natural gas and somewhat even coal. It's not just the government's posture, the Trump administration deprioritizing renewables. It's really funny. The critics of this administration and those who are so gung-ho about renewables are like, oh no, they're not letting the market dictate if renewables are viable. For the last 4 years, and actually even beyond that, The government tipped the scales in favor unfairly for renewables like solar and wind, and yet there's no mass adoption and prices are higher. Then you have premature closure of power plants, and when blackouts and brownouts and other shocks to the grid occur, you have to put back those reactors or power plants on because you just have this calamity that is from renewables because they're intermittent, they're weather dependent. That is why there is this big push, coupled with rising electricity demand, for more reliable energy projects and critical mineral projects. They're slightly different, but they relate to abundance, not this energy scarcity mindset that has been thrust upon us for the last few years. That's why I was really grateful for the invitation from Americans for Prosperity Wisconsin, Paul Sheckelman, who was on the show a few weeks ago to talk about his new project, Northwoods Policy Network. Paul was gracious enough to invite me with other stakeholders, including 2 Wisconsin congressmen, Tom Tiffany and Tony Wied, about the need for permitting reform, why they're interested in advancing it, why their caucus is advancing it. Democrats like Maine Congressman Jared Golden is a co-sponsor of the SPEED Act, for instance, and there's a couple others who are interested. But again, there is an effort by some elected Democrats who say, well, this deprioritizes solar and wind, so we can't support it. So if you put transmission language into this bill, we may support it, or you have to totally redo this. But the SPEED Act is a very comprehensive, simple bill, which would bring permitting reform and this whole process into the 21st century, because it's extremely laughable. I told you, just for pre-construction debate and deliberation, 7 to 10 years before you break ground. To construct, build, approve a new nuclear reactor could take that same amount of time. It's embarrassing. And China, Russia, no problem. They approve it. They're never held to account. They're never criticized for it. But the United States somehow supercharging reliable energy is always awful and evil for doing this. And I'm sick and tired of this rhetoric percolating and not being countered successfully, which is why during my remarks at the permitting reform roundtable in Wisconsin in the Green Bay area, I was asked by Paul to answer a question like, can permitting reform coexist with true conservation efforts? Absolutely. The goal of true conservation efforts is traditional interpretation, not this preservationist outlook on it. But the true conservation perspective, true conservation interpretation is the wise use of natural resources, not the non-use of natural resources, which is what preservationists want conservation to mean. With the wise use of natural resources, that means you do have forest management projects. You can have energy projects on public lands. You don't want a full catalyzation like a Western solar pan that would have opened up had the Trump administration not put a kibosh on this. 30 million acres across the West, 2 solar projects, the least reliable energy. Give me a break. That was abominable and terrible. And some conservationists were very quiet. Hunters and anglers were very quiet about that because they love renewables. And I didn't mind putting them on blast. It's not individual people, but as a collective, I wanted to put them on blast, and I criticized the particular groups who were pushing that or were radio silent until it became socially acceptable for them to say, no, actually, this is bad. But not every mining or oil and gas project should be objectionable. We need those type of projects. I have yet to see, and I think maybe Meat Eater talked about this, about nuclear, which I would like to see more hunter conservationists like me, those who have a wider audience, bigger platform than I have. This is a pretty small podcast comparison to Meat Eater. But those with bigger platforms in conservation should be talking about nuclear, perhaps as a solution, perhaps as a supplement. I think it's both. I think right now it's a supplement. Could it be a replacement in the future? Absolutely. I don't think it should be boggled down with net zero. Net zero would doom the technology, which we already have, and the future of, let's say, micro and smaller reactors, small modular reactors. Net zero is an end-all, be-all to future technologies. It paralyzed solar and wind. It made sure that they would never be viable in the market, private markets. You see lots of companies that have gotten government backing that wholly depend on government backing, if we're being honest, are collapsing in real time. That's why you're seeing this discussion about permitting reform and abundance and reliable energy all being intertwined together, because that's what you need. That's why companies, governmental agencies, the public sector, private sector, everyone is pivoting away from net zero. They might have rechanged or rephrased, let's say, sustainability commitments, but you see this huge pivot. I've observed this in the last 8 months here on the podcast since we've had a new administration. Perhaps some are doing it out of political convenience, so to curry favor with the Trump administration. But a lot of companies even and other stakeholders recognize that this net zero jargon is not sustainable financially, practically, for national security, and even for the environment. Because if you were to pivot 100% to net zero in a unicorn idealistic way, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, by 2050, 25 years from now, you would have to spend, according to Bloomberg, $215 trillion. That's several times over the GDP of the global economy. And that would ensure total calamity and destruction of the American economy, let alone other developed countries in the Western world. And how much are you reducing in emissions to stave off 1.5 degrees Celsius increase by 2050, according to the Paris Climate Accords, which no country is abiding by. No country thinks it's practical. That's why there's a very depressive mood going into COP30 in Brazil. And just a questioning of the United Nations and their climate directives altogether. They're not binding. Congress never passed a law to formally abide by the Paris Climate Accords. I don't know if you know that. But the Senate has to ratify treaties. The Senate never ratified the Paris Climate Accords. So the President Trump was in his authority to reject it because we never formalized it, thank goodness. And that Paris Climate Accord doesn't lead to anything. It's the U.S. bailing out countries who don't meet their own climate or energy goals, and those who are perhaps despoilers of the environment getting excuses and getting it passed, like China and Russia. That's what was the focus of President Trump's speech at the UN last week, where he said, you go towards net zero, you're going to invite energy scarcity, energy insecurity, higher costs, lower cost of living, and no measurable benefit to the environment. So as I was mentioning, the Paris Climate Accord says if all goes to plan, if everyone goes net zero, you'll stave off 1.5 degrees Celsius increase by 2050. Nobody's on track to meet that goal. Nobody thinks they can meet that goal. Nobody reasonably believes that's a practical goal to achieve. You can't do that. It's impossible. And when you're fixated on carbon emissions and achieving this goal, it obfuscates, perhaps real environmental problems that deserve attention. And according to the Heritage Foundation, the best conservative estimate of how much you would decrease by Celsius to stave off however many degrees Celsius you would stave off. The best estimate they could come up with, and these are very serious people. Kevin D'Anthra, who runs statistics specifically for climate and energy, is very trustworthy. Even if you don't like Heritage Foundation, you're skeptical of them, he is an authority on stats and research like this. He used the magic model that the UN uses and found that at best, the only Celsius decrease you would see if everyone were to go net zero, although it's trillions of dollars in lost dollars and economic destruction, 0.2 of a degree Celsius, 0.2 degrees Celsius decrease by 2050. If you're lucky. Actually, they said by 2100, when most of us are not going to be alive. So that is why permitting reform is adopting this abundance posture and is in conflict with net zero. I don't think permitting reform and net zero are in sync with one another. And same with energy abundance. You can't be energy abundant and energy scarce. That makes no sense. They are in polar opposites of each other. I have several derivatives to learn more about this issue because it is very convoluted. It has to be brought down from a granular level to simplicity. I have a letter that I wrote that really succinctly puts this issue in support from the C4 side of my organization, separate of the podcast, Independent Women, puts the SPEED Act into context, what it will deliver. I have a 60 seconds, 2-page explainer about misconceptions about permitting reform. I will link to the AFP tour that is going around the country on this very subject and other related material, the Permitting Council, if you want to learn more about it, and other basic facts. But what I expounded here on the podcast today about permitting reform, please, I hope it doesn't go over your head. Do research. I encourage you to do research because you can listen to me, you can trust me, and I hope you do, trust me. But I always encourage my listeners to do their own research. I love to have a treasure trove of sources and links. I'm very detail-oriented, and that's a way I've always been. So please do your own research too. Don't just simply blindly take what I'm saying. You can trust me, but I want you to see for yourself where I'm pulling these stats and information from. But permitting reform is not going away. We might see some appetite for it ahead of the holidays. I'm not sure if we're going to see a One Big Beautiful Bill part 2 relating or tackling permitting reform, but this is going to be something that will be deliberated, possibly passed before the midterms. It's a high priority item from people I hear in Congress. And you need to know more about it. It shouldn't be this mysterious concept. It actually is very easy to understand. But it just means that Congress has to do its job reforming certain laws like the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and other laws that are abused and misused by environmentalists in the courts to stop any project from happening. And even people who champion 100% renewables admit and concede that the permitting reform process is so outdated that even their beloved projects are held hostage. I will dedicate a couple more episodes to permitting reform here on the show for the rest of the year as those topics and the need comes. From a professional standpoint, my Center for Energy and Conservation at Independent Women is going to be weighing in on this issue on both our C3 side and especially our C4 side. So if you need some more demystification of this topic, stay tuned here and also check out what I'm doing professionally. On a more lighthearted note to end this episode debrief with you all, I want to talk about my trip to Vortex Optic. Right outside Madison, Wisconsin, I had some free time to kill before I had to fly back to Washington, D.C. from my talk in Green Bay on this permitting reform panel. I alerted my friend Ken Calhoun, who's been a longtime employee with Vortex, and his parents actually worked there. I believe his mother, he said to me, worked at Vortex even before him or slightly alongside him. I believe it was before his time. Ken can correct me. I reached out to Ken telling him that I'm in Wisconsin. I'm going to be pretty close to Madison. I have some free time. And he said, please come to the office. I looked at the map. It was about a 2-hour drive, give or take, from the Green Bay area, but it was doable. And it was actually quite close to Madison. And I had like a couple hours to kill. Why not? I get to Vortex headquarters and I see both Ken and my other friend, Ruben, who I connected with a few years ago, actually at a very consequential, very monumental hunt that I did at Solitude Ranch near Devil's Tower, Wyoming, at Mike Schmidt's, now Wyoming Representative Mike Schmidt's former hunting lodge, which is called Solitude Ranch. Beautiful place. He has sold it since. He used to be a Wyoming game commissioner. Now he's a state lawmaker in Wyoming. He was very generous to open up his ranch, his beautiful property, to myself, some military service members, and others, my friends Nephi Cole and David Wilm, who host the Your Mountain podcast. They've been on the show, and I've gone on their program several times since we all first connected 5 years ago. And if listeners from long ago will remember, in November 2020, I got my first ever deer with an AR platform. Very pivotal moment, turning point in my hunting journey, because I was primarily targeting waterfowl, turkey, pheasant, upland birds in general, and waterfowl. That's what I was going with, and lots of missed opportunities or missed shots with deer. And so that trip was very monumental in my hunting journey as an adult onset hunter. And Ruben was there. That's where our friendship began. I was surprised to see him there. I didn't expect to see him, but it was good to have both of them. The campus, let me tell you, is massive. It's one of the biggest facilities of any outdoor company I've been to in existence. And granted, I haven't been to every single company, but of the companies I visited working in the outdoor industry, it is massive. And they continue to expand. Alongside their campus is hunting ground where they can go hunting right after work or in lunch breaks. I believe near a nature conservancy or conservation area, which does permit hunting. So they have some sort of agreement where you preserve some portions of land next to their facility and they can go hunting like right after work ends. So very jealous that they have that. So you'll notice that, and they'll tell you that their facility is situated alongside prime hunting areas that are also conserved as well and protected. You walk in and it's this cool gift shop. You see taxidermy to your left. You see binoculars. You see spotting scopes. You see apparel, gear, and the like. And they have a photo booth, which is very cool. So when you are done touring the facility, you can take a photo, either to have it printed out or to email it to your phone. They're very keen on visitors doing that, which is very cool, very tech savvy, and very modern with respect to that. The guys showed me around the factory where a lot of the sausage is made. So I got to see how optics were being made behind the scenes, from the molding stage to the assembly stage to the polishing stage. And it was so cool. I got to see the different machines from Europe that were fine-tuning and adjusting and creating these different parts and polishing things. And then you got to see the assembly line. I saw the Vortex Edge, which is their shooting sports facility, training facility. I got most of my daily steps in through that visit. So that was really nice to be able to do that and then just tour the facility and the campus of one of the coolest outdoor brands ever. There's a reason why they call their fandom Vortex Nation and why they have a kind of following under that umbrella of Vortex Nation. They really prize customer service. Anytime you'll buy a product from them, it is for life. You can go there, and what they were showing me throughout, going to see like even the assembly line and the returns and even the sales side of things, that any product that comes for return, or not return, but for adjusting or some sort of repair, they don't just look at the place or the part that is not working. They examine the full product. They look at everything, every part of the product in question that they're repairing, even if there's nothing broken with it, to ensure quality assurance and that your product is good to go. That's customer service. I got to know Vortex through Ken. I actually met Ken through his wife. She used to work in politics with me. Lovely couple. And she's like, you have to meet my husband. At the time, I think they were just dating and soon to be fiancés. And she was like, you're going to SHOT Show. You have to go meet the Vortex guys. My boyfriend works for them. You'll love them. They have great products. And I got to meet them over the course of my time going to SHOT Show. I went to SHOT Show several times, I think to 4 SHOT Shows between 2015 and 2023, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a couple years since I last went. Yet I always scoped out the Vortex booth because I loved the products and I loved talking to the staff and seeing what they had. They always had the coolest arrangement. They had taxidermy bears. They had just a great display that invites you to come check it out. Like, there's a lot to see. It's very inviting. It's visually appealing. It's not just a boring display. It's pretty interactive. You can see the product. The staff are really friendly. So I always sought them out. And I befriended a lot of the staff throughout the years. The 2 aforementioned guys that I mentioned, Ken and Ruben. I know a couple other staffers too. It's a big company. All the staffers I've interacted with have been phenomenal. I have a Razor spotting scope, a Razor XD, I think. And right now I use it primarily for urban wildlife watching when I have time. I haven't used it in a few months, but it is really good for that type of purpose. But I want to use it for big game hunting too in the future. They make a lot of women's apparel too. They're starting to make more for women. So I love their t-shirts. They're very cozy, tight fitting, very nice. A lot of American elements to it. Good for fishing, the outdoors. I've used a lot of their different apparel that they've sent me over the years for layers or even like basic cover shirts when I go fishing. It's really good and reliable, and I've had several for several years. Not to mention their flannel. I have 2 flannel shirts from them. They're so durable. I've had them for several years. Very durable, long lasting, and so cozy and great to like put for fall weather, not just for hunting, but also for fall weather. Of course, with hunting, you're wearing orange, blaze orange or blaze pink. Not flannel, but like for after the hunt, super cozy to wear. I even wear it for activities, hanging out with friends for fall time activities here in the DC area. I go to breweries, I go to wineries in flannel, in the Vortex flannel. I've always liked the company. Now to see their headquarters in the flesh, like really makes me believe and trust them. They make really good quality products from optics to binos to spotting scopes. Of course, amongst friends, everyone will say they have a different preference. They may like Swarovski, Ride-On, and many of the other available brands, and there's a lot to choose from. We suffer from a lot of choice. It's not a bad thing, but there's a lot of choice. A good problem for Americans to have. But I truly think Vortex stands out. I need to get some optics from them at some point, maybe some binos, so we'll be working on that. But they're a great company. Go check them out online. Their brand is fantastic. They value customer service, and they have some great, exciting things coming out later this fall. So you got to stay tuned, and we'll probably have Ruben on the program to talk about what Vortex is up to, even more succinctly than what I'm debriefing you here with. So stay tuned to see when we will have Ruben on the program to talk about all things Vortex Optics. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.